Prologue: The Surovikin Line, a fortress forged in fire. By the autumn of 2022, the character of the war in Ukraine had undergone a brutal metamorphosis. The initial, chaotic blitzkrieg aimed at Kiev had failed spectacularly, giving way to a grinding war of attrition in the Donbass. After Ukraine's stunningly successful Kharkiv counteroffensive in September, which saw Russian forces routed across a wide front, a new reality dawned on the Kremlin. The Russian military, battered, demoralized, and stretched thin, could no longer sustain large-scale offensive operations across the entire theater. Defense was now the priority. In response, Russian General Sergei Surovikin, the newly appointed and notoriously ruthless commander of the invasion force, oversaw the creation of one of the most extensive systems of defensive fortifications seen in Europe since World War II. Dubbed the Surovikin Line by Western analysts, it was not a single trench but a vast, multi-layered network of death designed to bleed the Ukrainian military white. The line's philosophy was simple yet terrifyingly effective. Its depth was its greatest strength. A Ukrainian assault would not breach a single obstacle. It would have to navigate a gauntlet of mutually supporting killing zones. The outer layer, kilometers of dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped anti-tank concrete obstacles, minefields so dense they were dubbed carpet mining, and rows of razor wire. These were not random placements. They were carefully arranged to funnel attacking armor into pre-sighted artillery kill boxes. The middle layer, a labyrinth of interconnected trenches, bunkers, and reinforced firing positions for infantry, machine guns, and anti-tank guided missile (ATGM) teams. These positions allowed Russian troops to fall back in an organized manner, luring attackers deeper into the trap. The inner layer, more fortified positions, command nodes, and artillery emplacements, often located on reverse slopes to protect them from direct fire and make counter-battery fire more difficult. The reserves, mobile units, including tanks and mechanized infantry, held back to launch counterattacks against any Ukrainian force that miraculously penetrated the first three layers, exploiting their inevitable disorganization and attrition. This was the problem Ukraine faced in the spring and summer of 2023. The world expected a grand, NATO-style counteroffensive with sweeping armored maneuvers. Ukraine knew that such a charge into the Surovikin line would be suicide. They needed a new way to fight. They needed to erase these defenses from a distance before a single soldier stepped forward. The bloody battlefield would be won not just with courage and infantry, but with a precise, brutal symphony of Western tanks and indigenous cruise missiles. Part 1. The Tools of Erasure, a dual-track strategy. Ukraine's strategy to dismantle Russia's defenses evolved into a sophisticated two-pronged approach, each element crucial and interdependent. Prong 1. The Fist of Steel, Western armored vehicles and tanks. For over a year, Ukraine had pleaded with its Western allies for modern main battle tanks, MBTs. The Soviet-era T-64s, T-72s, and T-80s that formed the backbone of their armored fist were brave but outclassed by newer Russian models and, more importantly, were desperately needed in vast numbers that Ukraine's struggling defense industry could not replenish. The arrival of Western MBTs was not just about getting better hardware, it was about getting a force multiplier that could survive the initial onslaught and punch through the breach. The key platforms included Leopard 2, Germany and Netherlands, Poland, Canada. Others the workhorse of the NATO contribution. Over 100 units of various models, 2A4, 2A5, 2A6, were pledged. The Leopard offered excellent fire control systems, allowing for accurate shooting on the move, high first-hit probability, and superior mobility. Its composite armor provided significantly better protection against older Russian munitions. Challenger 2, United Kingdom, a smaller contingent of 14 tanks, but notable for being the first Western MBT pledged. Its defining feature was its rifled 120mm gun, firing unique armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding Sabo APFSDS rounds, and its legendary Chobham armor, offering exceptional protection. M1A1 Abrams, United States, the iconic American tank. Initially deemed too complex and fuel-hungry for Ukraine's needs, 31 were eventually pledged. Its powerful gas turbine engine, advanced sensors, and formidable 120mm smoothbore gun made it a potent breakthrough vehicle. But tanks alone are vulnerable. They needed support. This came in the form of Bradley Fighting Vehicles, USA, and Marder IFVs. Germany, these infantry fighting vehicles, IFVs, were arguably as important as the tanks. Armed with powerful autocannons, 25mm on the Bradley, 20mm on the Marder, and TOW anti-tank missiles, they provided mobile fire support to protect the tanks from infantry and other vehicles. They could carry the dismounted troops essential for clearing trenches and securing breached areas. Mine-clearing vehicles. Specialized vehicles like the Leopard 2-based Wissant and donated Soviet-era systems were vital. They used plows, rollers, or flails to clear paths through the dense minefields. The first and most critical obstacle. Armored recovery vehicles. Essential for retrieving damaged or broken-down tanks and IFVs under fire, preserving precious armored strength. These systems were integrated into new, dedicated assault brigades trained extensively by NATO countries. The training focused not just on operating the new equipment, but on combined arms tactics. The intricate dance of tanks, infantry, artillery, and engineers working in concert. Prong 2. The long knife, indigenous cruise, and ballistic missiles. While the world watched the tank deliveries, Ukraine was quietly developing and deploying a more subtle, yet equally devastating weapon, long-range precision strike capability. If the tanks were the fist that would smash through the wall, these missiles were the tools that would dismantle the wall's foundation, brick by brick, from 100 miles away. Russia's defense in depth relied on a complex ecosystem. The trenches were just the teeth. The nervous system was the command and control, C2 nodes, the ammunition depots, the fuel reserves, the artillery positions, and the barracks. Destroy these, and the formidable teeth become isolated and useless. Ukraine's long-range arsenal aimed to do exactly that. HIMARS/GMLRS, USA. While not a cruise missile, the M142 HIMARS, high-mobility artillery rocket system, was the pioneer of this strategy. Since its arrival in summer 2022, its GPS-guided rockets, GMLRS, with a 70 kilometers range had proven devastatingly accurate against ammunition dumps, command posts, and concentration areas. It forced the Russian army to decentralize its logistics, pushing them further back and making supply lines longer and more vulnerable. Storm Shadow/Scalp EG, UK/France. The game changer. These are Anglo-French air-launched cruise missiles, ALCMs, with a range in excess of 250 kilometers. Donated in mid-2023, they gave Ukraine the ability to strike high-value targets deep behind the front lines, and even in occupied Crimea, with a stealthy, low-altitude profile that made them very difficult to intercept. Their Broach tandem warhead was designed specifically to penetrate hardened targets like bunkers, headquarters, and bridge supports. ATACMS, USA. A long-awaited capability finally provided in late 2023 in a limited cluster munition variant. The Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS, has a range of up to 300 kilometers and is fired from the HIMARS launcher. It provided a ballistic missile option to complement the cruise missiles, capable of striking airfields, helicopter bases, and large troop formations with devastating area effects. Neptune anti-ship missile, Ukraine adapted for land attack. The homegrown R-360 Neptune anti-ship missile famously sank the cruiser Moskva. Its land attack variant demonstrated Ukraine's ingenuity, providing another medium-range strike option to target headquarters and logistics in the southern theater. Drones, the ubiquitous eye and nuisance. While not missiles, drones are integral to this deep strike concept. Bayraktar TB2S in the early war, and now thousands of first-person view (FPV) drones serve as spotting tools for artillery and missiles, and have themselves become precision-guided munitions, able to hunt individual soldiers and light vehicles in trenches. This dual-track strategy created a vicious cycle for Russian defenders, shaping the battlefield from depth with missiles, then exploiting the chaos with armored fists. Part 2. The Battle of the Breach, a case study in Zaporizhia. The theory was sound, but the summer of 2023 would be its brutal testing ground. The focal point was the Zaporizhia sector, where Ukraine aimed to sever the land bridge between Russia and occupied Crimea, the ultimate strategic prize. The initial assaults in June were brutal and costly. The Russian defenses proved even more formidable than anticipated. Minefields were wider and deeper. Electronic warfare, EW, systems jammed Ukrainian drones, blinding their assault units. Russian Lancet loitering munitions hunted Ukrainian armor with terrifying efficiency. The Leopards and Bradleys were better protected than Soviet models. Videos emerged of Bradleys absorbing massive hits and keeping their crews alive, but they were not invincible. Several were destroyed or damaged. Western analysts and media, expecting a rapid breakthrough, began to prematurely label the counteroffensive a failure. But Ukraine was learning and adapting. They shifted from large-scale, frontal assaults to a more methodical, brutal campaign of attrition. A battle of the breach. Phase 1. The long-range shaping operation. Before major ground assaults, the long knife went to work. Using intelligence from partisans, satellites, and reconnaissance drones, Ukrainian targeters identified key nodes supporting the specific sector they intended to attack. Artillery hunting. Counter-battery radars located Russian artillery positions. These coordinates were fed to HIMARS and, if within range, conventional artillery. The goal was not to destroy every tube, but to suppress them, force them to move constantly, and degrade their accuracy during the critical opening phase of an assault. Logistic decapitation. Storm Shadow missiles streaked low across the countryside. Targets included command bunkers in Tokmak and Melitopol. Strikes on these cities aimed to decapitate the Russian chain of command, creating confusion and delaying the authorization of counterattacks. Ammunition depots. Massive secondary explosions were filmed nightly as hidden depots in forests and industrial areas were struck by GMLRS rockets, starving forward Russian troops of shells. Fuel reserves. Without diesel, Russia's mobile reserve tanks and IFVs were immobilized. Rear area terror. Atom's cluster munitions, when they arrived, were used to devastating effect on airfields like those in Berdyansk and Luhansk, destroying helicopters, repair facilities, and parked aircraft. This relentless campaign did not destroy the Surovikin line, but it severely degraded its functionality. Command was disrupted, logistics were strained, and artillery support became less responsive. Phase 2. The breaching battle, the most difficult task since World War II. This was the hellish part. Ukrainian assault groups, centered on a few Western tanks and a company of infantry and IFVs, would approach a designated breach point. Mine clearing. Under constant artillery, mortar, and drone-drop grenade fire, mine-clearing vehicles would push forward to clear narrow lanes. They were prime targets for Russian Kornet and Lancet attacks. Many were lost. This was slow, dangerous, and costly work. Suppression.
If that kind of courage shakes,
Bradley and
you press
Marder
one.
IFVs
If you've
would
never
use
been
their
further behind,
autocannons
press
to
two.
pour
And
suppressive
hit
fire
subscribe.
onto Russian
Because
trench
real
lines,
heroism isn't fiction.
trying to keep enemy
It's happening
infantry's
now.
heads down.
The hammer and the trap.
Meanwhile,
By
Ukrainian
10:47
artillery and
a.m.,
mortars
Ukrainian
laid
forces
down
had turned
smoke
defense
screens
into
to obscure
dominance.
the
What
breach
began as a
operation.
desperate hold
The
had
assault,
evolved into a
once a
tightening
lane
noose.
was hopefully
The Bradley
cleared,
rescue operation
the tanks
hadn't
would
just
advance,
saved lives, it
providing
reignited
direct
momentum.
fire support with
Russian
their main
forces,
guns against
fragmented and
bunkers
bleeding
strong
vehicles,
points.
still attempted to regroup
Dismounted
on the northern
infantry,
edge. But
following
Ukraine had
closely
other
behind,
plans.
would then
UAVs detected
engage in the brutal, intimate
BTR-82
work of trench clearing with rifles, grenades, and drones. The counterattack. As predicted, if a foothold was gained, Russian mobile reserves would rush to the scene to try and seal the breach. This was the moment of maximum danger and opportunity. Phase 3. The kill zone. The Russian counterattack was a core tenet of their defense. But Ukraine's long-range shaping had made it vulnerable. The counterattacking Russian forces, often consisting of T-80 or T-90 tanks and BMPs, now had to assemble and move forward under the watchful eyes of Ukrainian drones. Their movements were reported in real time. Coordinates were sent not to the frontline Ukrainian troops, who were engaged in a desperate fight, but to the HIMARS batteries and artillery crews 20 kilometers behind the lines. As the Russian reserves concentrated for their push, they were met with a rain of precision-guided GMLRS rockets and 155mm shells. The counterattack would often be broken up before it even reached the breach, with vehicles destroyed and infantry scattered. This was the synergy. The missiles erased the Russian capacity to respond effectively, allowing the armored fist to hold the ground it had taken at such great cost. The breakthrough at Robotyne. This painful, methodical process is what eventually led to the capture of the key village of Robotyne in late August 2023. It was not a dramatic cavalry charge, but a weeks-long slog of incremental gains, shaped by long-range fire. The fall of Robotyne proved the first layer of the main Surovikin line could be breached. It opened the door to the more strategically important town of Verbove and beyond. While the offensive eventually stalled with the autumn rains before reaching the sea, it proved the concept. Western armor could survive and advance, but only when enabled by a relentless deep strike campaign. Part 3. The strategic impact, beyond the battlefield. The effects of this erase and exploit strategy reverberated far beyond the muddy fields of Zaporizhia. Economic warfare. Every storm shadow that destroyed a command bunker, every HIMARS rocket that obliterated an ammunition depot, had a colossal economic cost for Russia. Rebuilding command infrastructure, replenishing ammunition stocks, and replacing lost equipment stretched Russia's defense budget and industrial capacity to its limits. The strategy effectively turned the Surovikin line from a static asset into a massive resource sink. Morale and command decapitation. The deep strikes had a profound psychological impact. Senior Russian officers and officials, who once felt safe in occupied cities, were now vulnerable. The reported killing of high-ranking officers in storm shadow strikes in Berdyansk and elsewhere created a climate of fear and paranoia, disrupting command efficiency. Logistics officers became hesitant to concentrate supplies, creating bottlenecks and shortages at the front. The Black Sea Fleet campaign. Nowhere was the success of the long-range strike strategy more evident than